the Eye Test with Eric and Brady. We've got another fabulous guest today. We're going to talk about sports from a little bit different perspective with me as a photographer, Brady as a writer. Thanks for being here and enjoy the show. All right, well, this is Eric. I'm Eric. This is Brady here with me. We're kind of kicking off I don't know if you want to call it the next season of the Eye Test, but we're adding some video into this to the element of everything right now. And so we're going to go from there. Today we want to talk about, we're going to get a little bit in the weeds with what we do for a living and how we do it. I did a post a couple weeks ago where I went off on a little bit of a rant about craftsmanship, because I think it's uber important and something that I think how do I want to say this without sounding like the old get off my lawn guy, but really I think it's something that's lacking with some of the younger journalists that are coming into the business right now, especially from my perspective. I talk about it from my perspective as a photographer, really big on craftsmanship, understanding your tools, how to use them, how to maximize them, how to do everything to realize the vision you have in your head, and doing things with intention. I'm just really, really huge about doing things with intention, approaching your job with a purpose and an intended goal, and having the skill set to be able to get there. The phrase that I came up with when I was doing that started my rant a couple weeks ago about this was, I said, lack of craftsmanship is not a creative choice. Yeah. Right? So often I see photographers, especially newer photographers. I won't just say younger photographers, because some people come to it later in life, but newer photographers where they make a mistake, or they didn't exactly know what they were doing, but they screwed up and made a really nice image. Yeah. And while that happens, and that still happens to me at this point in my career, I call them happy accidents. But you can't happy accident your way to success in not just photography or writing or really anything. You have to be able to develop your craft to the point where you can have repeatable success and do the things that you have in your head. Like, from my perspective as a photographer, I have a vision or a photo that I want to do. I need to be able to have the technical expertise to know how to execute that vision and make it happen, while allowing for a little serendipity along the way. Happy surprises that come up, and being able to recognize that happy surprise when it comes your way, and going, wow, that's really good, let's do more of that, which happens a certain amount. And I know when you and I were talking about this, about doing this episode, that I thought it would be good because it very much applies to what you do as well, right? Where I'm using cameras and lenses and shutter speeds and things like that, you're using words and sentences and paragraphs and quotes, and you can't just you have to have that craftsmanship.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if you've got a laptop, if you're typewriting it out, whatever it is. I mean, the trade still it still holds true. I mean, right. Regardless of whatever tool or latest technology that you've got at your disposal.
God, can you imagine trying to do your job with a typewriter?
I've done it before.
Really?
Yeah, it's been difficult, but even swapping stories with some of the old journalists who I worked with at the Journal Star, they talk about back in the 70s, where like after a football game on a Friday night, they'd go into the local bar and type up their story, and they'd call it in, and they'd call it into the the sports desk, and
right.
Then, but that was back when your print deadline was probably 2 a.m. and you could afford to do that. Where now, even though all the technology makes things streamlined because of outsourcing and cutting back staff and
right.
and doing all that, now their print deadlines are 6 p.m. and shoot, if you've got a Husker game that kicks off at 7 p.m., sometimes you don't even get the full gamer in the paper the next morning anymore.
Right. And well, I'm old enough. I've been doing this long enough that I
Fair.
started off with film, so I know what it was like
Yeah.
to work at a small newspaper and have to cover 3 football games
Yeah.
in one night that all kicked off at 7
Yeah.
and had to drive like 10, 15 minutes between little towns, right? So it was like, go to this game, boom, 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 2, 3 rolls of film real quick, jump in the car, get to the next one. And the way I usually attacked this task when it happened once or twice a year was I started at the school farthest away.
And work your way back
And
in.
then I worked my way back, and it was at the Columbus Telegram. And so my last game was right there,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
boom. And then it was like, one time I remember I literally showed up to Columbus High School, and there was 3 minutes left on the clock. Run out there on the field, shot like one drive or part of one drive.
And you get the celebration shots.
And whatever it came up with, and hustle back, because our deadline was like 11:30, something like that. So I had to hustle back, throw the film. I had all my chemistry warmed up, ready to go. So as soon as I walked into the dark room, it was, and what you do is you go through and you mark like the canister, and you go, I think this one's got the picture, because I could only do like 8 of them at a time.
Right.
Right. So, okay, I need these 8. Boom, doom, printing wet negatives. Can't even wait for them to dry.
Yeah.
Right. Or you were standing there with a blow dryer just drying one frame.
Yeah.
Boom, tray, print, handing wet prints to the copy desk. Right. Here you go.
Well, and even that, like, and this might, it's a big thing for me in terms of craftsmanship, and it was probably is for you as well, that to have your darkroom ready and everything, you never know exactly what's going to happen when it comes time to, like, shoot a game or write about a game. Preparation means a whole lot. I mean, you have an idea, you have your framework in mind, you build that framework of a home, basically, and then you kind of build it out. But without that framework and without that sort of, I don't even want to call it a safety net, but without that preparation done beforehand,
Yep.
to allow what makes that one game or
It
that
can allow
one
you to
event,
be a little bit faster as a professional on the backside.
right?
If you've done your prep work. Same thing goes for me. We have our caption loads ready, and every picture gets loaded with a pre-caption and naming things and all that. That happens automatically in there. But having that, it's really kind of a conundrum sometimes, because as a photographer, what we do is a very reactionary event, right? We don't know what's going to happen. I don't get to control where it happens, right? I don't get to control how it happens, where it happens, when it happens, where the light is. So it can be an overwhelmingly reactionary event sometimes, which makes it very difficult to have vision and execute things with intention, like purposefully choosing, because you don't know, is the play going to go left, if it's going to go right, running play, pass play, we don't know. But it's almost more important to have that intention, so that if things do go your way and you have a little forethought and go, if I sit here and the play goes here, it's going to be fabulous.
Yeah.
If the play goes here, it's going to be just another football play, right? Like I was telling somebody the other day about, they were complaining about how afternoon games in Memorial Stadium later in the year, that shadow like comes across half of the field and how much they hate it. Yeah. And I was telling them, no, I actually love it. And they had this surprised look on their face. And I told them, I said, listen, if you shoot from a certain corner, the one that I've grown to love for this exact reason over the years of shooting there, because as that shadow creeps across the stands on the west side, right? If they run that way, you get a black background.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you can't even see the fans. It's just like this guy with full sun on him, and the background is black,
Yeah.
right? And sometimes it happens, and sometimes it doesn't, right? And then sometimes when they cross into that shadow, then it creates a problem, an exposure problem,
Right.
right? Because now we just went from, 4,000th of a second to 1,000th of a second. And how do you handle all of that? But that's where that craftsmanship comes in, right? You understand your tools and how they work and how all those numbers stack together. You hear a lot of people talk about in photography craftsmanship. Everybody still leans on the exposure triangle. You've heard people talk about that, right? And I was thinking about this the other day, and I've thought about it a lot lately. How that exposure triangle has become kind of less important because the cameras are so good by themselves.
Yeah.
You could I could almost literally hand you my camera gear and just put everything on auto, and all the pictures are going to be exposed well. I will say that much. And because they're that good, so it's almost like that part of it is less important, but then it allows us to focus more on like the thing that the triangle that's more important to me, which is composition, moment, and light, all the creative things.
Yeah.
Right. And I was thinking the other day, to get back to the exposure triangle part, about how things, it's almost like and how I shoot and make my choices in that triangle. It used to be in the film days, the invariable one was your films, or the less variable one was your ISO. Because you loaded a whole roll of film in there, you at least had 36 frames before you were going to get to change your numbers again. Right? So you started with, what is my ISO? What shutter speed can I get out of this? Right? Or more, because things were more limited, you started with, what was my ISO? The max aperture on my lens is 2.8. How much shutter speed can I eke out of this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And now things have gotten so good that it's almost turned on its head. My first decision is what shutter speed I want. My second decision is usually ISO on the camera, because I hardly ever take any of my lenses off of wide open.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely. Like if I'm shooting a portrait, I might stop it down to 5.6 or something if I want more depth of field for a reason. Even then, I rarely do it. So that's like my last consideration. And in fact, I was telling a guy a story. This is a little sidetrack, but someone was talking about needing a lens repair
Mm-hmm.
because their apertures weren't working, and it was an older lens and it needed some repair. And I was telling them a story about how I think it was in the early 2000s, somewhere in there, I had a Nikon 300 2.8 at the time, where one of my aperture blades was busted. It got sticky and it would just stop working.
Okay.
So I took it to my local camera guy and I said, listen, just disconnect it and have it be wide open all the time. And he looked at me just like that. Like, really? You don't want to be able to stop this thing down at all? I said, no, why would I? Why would I not? I mean, why would I? When am I ever going to need to stop this thing down? It's a sports lens.
That's a good point, I guess.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to shoot it wide open all the time. I shoot my lenses wide open in bright daylight. And if I got to crank my shutter speed up to an 8,000th of a second, fine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because everything is so fluid. It's just so fast that you really, I mean, that brightness, I don't know, like especially with college athletes by and large that we cover mostly. I mean, you do shoot some high school stuff, but like the action and everything is just so fast. It's just, you need that.
Well, it's not just the only. It's not just the only reason we shoot. We shoot wide open all the time. Most sports photographers, 99% of them, shoot wide open all the time because you want to be able to blur that background.
Oh,
Much
yeah, I
like
didn't
it's
even think
much
of
like
that.
it's very similar to what a portrait photographer does. Remember when Zamani was on and we were talking about that same thing?
Yeah.
Because him and I have talked about it. Like it's the exact same approach as a portrait photographer does.
Okay.
Right? You want to blur that background so it's nice and creamy, and we try to do the same thing as sports photographers. And that's let's circle it back here. That's where that craftsmanship comes in, right? You're doing things for a reason,
Yeah.
right? It may cut down on the number of usable pictures you have by making some of these choices because it's not a safe choice. But I didn't come over to Hail Varsity Magazine to make safe choices in photography,
That's fair. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I specifically came over here to start to try and push the envelope and do things, which is really hard to do at this point. And I bet you run into the exact same problem I have at this point in the history of sports photography. It's insanely difficult to come up with something new.
Yeah.
It's insanely difficult.
Yeah.
Like, how do you write a new story? Okay, you've been doing Matt Rule for a couple months now. How do you do a new story on Matt Rule?
Well,
Uh,
there's always something interesting and new because the one Matt Rule story that I'm most proud of or that I'm most fond of all the energy I put into was one of the first ones. It was one of the magazine ones where it basically chronicles his upbringing, like gives a shade into the background of the person. There was very few, I think there might have been one quote or very little about Matt talking about himself or anything. I talked to some of his old high school coaches, his old high school football coaches. I got in contact with some people who had wrote about his dad before, and his dad is a big influence on Matt on him. So you kind of get a grander idea there, to the point of like the moves and what made him, and what are some key moments that made him who he is. And I think it takes a little bit of innovation, or at least thinking of things a little bit different, especially in the sense of like Nebraska football, when everything is, I don't want to call it oversaturated, but when
it's oversaturated.
you've got a dozen different media outlets covering it, and especially for us, we're in this such unique, and one thing I love about being a part of Hail Varsity is we do think unique, we think different. Part of that is out of necessity almost, like
Mm-hmm.
you're Nebraska's two legacy biggest newspapers are now collaborating on Husker sports
And barely keeping the lights turned
and
on.
and barely keep it. But at any point you go to anything and they've got 6, 7 people there, whereas it's been only me going to the exact same events with them before.
Right.
So it's like I obviously by outchurn and all of this can't keep up with as much copy as they're putting out. So you got to think different. You got to think what's going to cut to the heart of this. What's going to be the best story, or what's going to be the one that people are going to care most about, or what are some aspects of it that you can kind of
Right.
tie in.
So you have the exact same problem I have that we talk about every month on our photo call when we're choosing photos is because of our print schedule, by the time we see, ink on paper and it gets mailed into somebody's mailbox, it does us no good to show them a picture they've seen 12 times over,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In the last month, in the last few weeks. And I'm really, really big on that. And that's where that intention comes back about what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Because I see no point in showing them a picture that everybody else has gotten and shown you for 3 weeks already.
Yeah.
Right. And you have the same problem on the word side, right? Well, you're not going to write the same story and throw out the same information that everybody's been doing for 3 weeks already.
And it won't even like approach like now that spring ball is going on, or during the spring season, you get things a little bit more constant. There's more news. There's more outchurn. I approach it personally as like here's a daily story, or here's something. Whereas if it's a magazine piece or a bigger, grander feature story, I'm going to approach that thing in an entirely different way.
No, I get it. Same thing. I mean, we go through the same. If we're just turning out photos from a basketball game for a gallery.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. We'll put that in. We'll put that in. Put that. But when it comes to like choosing the 4 that are going to be double trucks in the magazine, that's when I get a little stingy about what are we doing, why are we doing it, right?
Yeah.
But the word that has stuck in my mind for a long time, which kind of becomes my benchmark, is trying to do something timeless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? You don't want it to be so dated that it's only worth, if you're doing dated photos, I mean, they're great today and they might be okay tomorrow, but by next week nobody's going to care about that.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
you got the exact same thing, maybe even more so in some respects with what you're doing. Because you want it to be timeless. You want someone to be able to pick that up 10 years from now and have it be interesting.
Yeah, because there are, obviously it's different with photo and words, but there are like stories that I'll even think about some story I read 5-10 years ago and think like, I need to reread that story. Like maybe the issues or the focal points aren't even applicable anymore, but that left you thinking, it left you feeling one thing. It left you having a personable approach about different people, but the story itself is a grander, societal story or team story or something that is bigger than itself that you could personify into a personable story about people that you think, okay, I need to apply this. Much like with what you do is like a good photo, a good crisp photo is one that people are going to hang up, but it's also like one that is a little bit more than just a really cool photo.
Right.
Like you can really dive into that more.
It means something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it means something more for me, like what I consider a timeless photo is something that has meaning, like I was saying, beyond today.
Yeah.
Right. It has something, whether it's actual information or if it's a feeling or just, it could be as simple as a stadium shot from the last row of the stadium, or it could be Garrett Nelson walking off the field like we've talked about, or Scott Frost, with his hand on his face because he just realized that
whoopsie daisy,
we lost this game and now I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah. Well, in that one, we'll go there real quick. After that game and as that unfolded, did you have that feeling in your stomach when you went to the photo
I knew
room?
when I shot that photo.
Yeah.
I knew when I was watching him. I knew when I made that photo. The look on his face, his body language, the way he reacted, that was the moment that he knew that it was over.
Yeah.
I can't lose this game and keep my job. And that was the moment where he realized we're not winning this game. Because I stalked him. I stalked him from the beginning of the season on the sidelines. I mean, I did that with intention, looking for the photo, and the way it turned out was exactly the intention I had for it, right? I stalked him looking for the image that was going to be the cover when he lost his job, because we all knew it was going to happen.
Yeah.
After the trip to Ireland, we all knew he was going to lose his job.
Yeah.
So I stalked him every time he was on that end of the sidelines, and every time something would happen, I'd pan back over to the sidelines. How's he reacting? What's he reacting? And that was the moment.
Yeah.
I knew it when I saw it. I was like, that's our cover, I think, when he loses his job.
Because we were down on the sidelines. At that point, all the press had been gone down so that we could quickly get in. For those who don't know, we were down on the sidelines. That way, once the game is over, we could run to the media room or the weight room at that point where they were doing media.
Right.
And then they have their post-game press availability there. So we weren't up in the press box at the time. Down in the corner end zone, northwest corner of the end zone, watch it unfold and realize, okay, Georgia Southern just scored. I don't think Nebraska's got enough time, and they didn't. And as that game unfolded, it's just kind of like, that's one that, that's the one, right? Like it's one thing to lose to Northwestern in Ireland and what Northwestern became, but even that was in Ireland. That was the season opener. Maybe right. Northwestern was good. Of course, at that time.
At the time, we thought maybe they're better than we think, but they weren't.
Whereas you get Georgia Southern with fresh coach Clay Helton, like a team that had been a triple option team who just realize the forward pass 3 weeks prior should not be able to throw for 600 yards.
True that.
And I just, again, coming out of that press conference and like walking back with like the rest of the group, like I had that feeling where I was like, I think that's it. I think he gets fired tomorrow. And in that moment, while we're walking back, I take a beat and I get my phone out and I take a picture of the stadium so I can remember what that looks like as the crowd's already emptied out and everything. And in that moment, there's also, again, for those who don't know, there's a group of kids that are just, on Tom Osborne Field just throwing the ball around and they're playing. And I make a note of that, and I'm taking that down on my notes and kind of getting that little bit of picture. And it ends up as like the end of my game story from that one, as like who knows what happens tomorrow, but hours and hours after the disappointment hadn't even subsided from the guts of the people traveling home, the ball was still thrown, football was still played, and in the morning, football will again be played in Nebraska because they've got another game to get ready for.
Right.
And like those are the little things, again, circling back to craftsmanship. For me, because you never really know what's going to happen, notes, keeping an active eye, keeping aware with all of your surroundings and your situation.
I'm glad you brought that back because I was just thinking about I was going to do the same thing because I know what craftsmanship means to me and what I do for a living, and I touched on all of that, knowing your gear and how to use it, and just like any other craftsman with their tools, having a vision, doing things with intention. But what are those things, like you were saying, taking notes? What are those things that you would consider craftsmanship in your side of the business? I mean, beyond spelling and basic grammar. I'm always fascinated when I read stories because while I think I'm relatively well versed in writing, I could never do it as fast as you guys do it. And there's always the subtlety of how to craft a story, right? And there's an actual thought out organization to a story.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that you organize those just the same way I organize my galleries and photo coverage of things with that same intention. What are some of those things?
Well, most of the time, like I'll have in my notes, I'll plan it out of like, here's my opening, here's my lead, here's my opening scene. If it's a daily turnaround story, I'll basically just have, I want to lead with this or this quote or this thing that pops out to me, and then move into this, and then move into this, and then basically have 3 or 4 of them, and then just kind of build out from that frame.
You have a basic formula you follow for like some of the daily churning out stuff versus a deeper, thoughtful feature piece, which you can kind of go in many directions with. But do you have like a basic framework? Like, for instance, when I go cover, we'll say basketball game, because that's what we've been doing a lot lately, right? I always try to shoot a wide shots, medium shots, tight shots, reaction shots, right?
Yeah.
And those are all the things that I want in my game coverage, right? Whether it's fans reacting or coaches reacting or players, wide shots, medium shots, tight shots. It's kind of a lifelong. It's a formula that's worked for photographers for a long time.
Yeah.
And everybody does it.
Yeah.
Do you have those same kind of things when you're just like churning out your daily stuff? Where do you have like I have my opener, then I set the scene, then I get into some quotes, then do you have a formula? Like if I was to go analyze this last month's worth of daily churns, am I going to see a pattern?
Potentially. I think because I do approach kind of the daily churn versus like a game story differently and everything. Usually it's like what's going to catch your eye. Like it's going to sound weird, but Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers used to have a saying around their camp: "Don't bore us, get to the chorus." They didn't want to deal with any of the Pink Floyd progressive rock stuff at the time. They wanted to get right into it, right? And I kind of course, every story is different, and you treat the story as it needs to be treated. But especially with this, don't bore us, get to the chorus. Like, what's your immediate story from the first day of camp? Matt Rule came out in shorts and said, it was a little bit early, but I'm glad to be here, and we're glad to be out here. What's the big news? What happened? I'm trying to think of like what a good analog is at the moment, but it's like just say just say right out front, like, what's the big thing? What happened? And people, because people, if they're going to read the story, they're already going to have the headline. They're already going to have a general idea
Hmm.
of what happened. Don't tease it out. You can just put it out there on Front Street, because then the rest is just the full context and reaction or anything else that came about, especially now, in kind of the daily churn. Whereas, like, for a game story, everybody who is reading the story has already been there. They already watched the game. Nobody's going to find out what happened in a Husker football game by reading a Brady Oltman's game story. They're so I'm writing those in the moment for someone who wants to be in the moment, wants to feel like they were at the game, or wants to know, like, what was this like in that immediate sense. And then my follow-up story, the one for the next morning, the ones that you've seen me had a hotel room at 2:30 in the morning writing, is those are the ones that, like, in your various states of, I need orange juice, X, Y, and Z leaders,
Right.
that next morning, here, how do I feel about this? And I kind of dial it back into, this is the prevailing thought. This is what happens next. Where do we go from here, kind of thing. Whereas the game story itself was, here's what happened. Holy cow. Like, can you believe all of that? And then the next one is, what happens next? What's going on? And there's various degrees. You want people to feel it. You want people to feel attached to it. And there's various ways of doing that in terms of, like, sentence structure, the way that you put people first, the way that it's more active or gets people involved. You have less of, like, the narrator, so and so said this or so and so said that. It's moving into, like, keeping everybody active and everything like that. But those are just kind of general ways that you can do it.
I'd be really curious on this topic of craftsmanship to ask Matt Rule what is craftsmanship in coaching?
We've our
Like, what does that mean to a coach?
our editorial staff is kind of Brandon, Aaron, and I kind of talked about this one day of, like, just floating something similar out there of, like, of a question to ask Matt when we get the sit down for him for the yearbook is, like, because he talks about all these different aspects, and it's like, how much does winning games matter? Like, not just like hey, you talk about all this other stuff, how about winning?
Right.
Like, he talks about the day-to-day stuff, the regimens, getting things in place, the cultures, and everything's built. How much of actual game, like, winning games, in, like, depends upon winning games?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'll be curious to see how that how that how that gets stated, because I would bet his idea of craftsmanship is that day to day,
Yeah.
the process, right? The detail oriented process,
Yeah.
right? The you know you'll hear some of the older Huskers talk about how detailed, like the linemen,
Hmm.
like they would talk about how detailed their practice was. Like,
Yeah.
your first step, you missed it by 3 inches. Like,
Yeah.
you missed it by 3 inches, and it mattered. Hand placement, things like that. You missed it. Instead of here, you had here, and right, how though that attention to detail. But I'm going to be curious to see how he reacts to that, to those questions, and what I don't know if you want to ask it with the word craftsmanship,
Well, it's
but
just a different word for, like, culture and a different word for the process. I mean, it's all, I think.
it's a different word for the process. But yeah, I just always I glommed onto the word craftsmanship because
Yeah.
I used to get in this debate with other photographers. Some of them more, I'll say, more artsy oriented than an old journalist is, and what constituted art, right? And they were always from the corner of just the doing of the thing makes it art. If your intention was to create art, it's art. And I just always struggle with that. Like, how can you do things with intention if you don't understand the skills required to execute your vision, right? I was always from the camp of, you have to have a certain level of craftsmanship before you can intentionally create art.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Well, I stirred a lot of cages with that one because, the more artsy people want to say just saying you want to create art or saying that you intended to make art is enough to make it art. And my pushback was always, but was that the intention in your head? That final product, is that exactly what you intended to create? Because if not, it was just an accident. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not great and it's not awesome and it doesn't look great. I'm just saying, how much of an artist are you if you're hoping to happy accident your way to success?
Quick baseball analogy. Guy can have a good day.
Yeah.
Guy could even have a good season. He could have a happy accident of a season. Guy can't have a happy accident career.
Nope.
Baseball, you succeed in what you wanted, or even not even what you wanted to do. 3 times out of 10, you're a Hall of Famer if you do that across the duration of your career.
And there's craftsmanship and all of that too, right? Yeah. How can you handle the outside pitch? Can you hit opposite field when you got a guy on third?
Yeah.
Intentionally.
It's tough.
You can't happy accident that. It might happen.
Yeah.
But your coach is over there giving you the sign saying, I need, he's just flat out telling you, we need one on the right side.
Mm-hmm. Just slap it anywhere in that
and in that situation, the pitcher's probably going to pitch you inside, so it's harder for you to hit opposite field.
Got to get those hips, got to get those hands.
But you got to know your craft. You have to understand what you can do, what your skill set is, what the pitcher's likely to do, how the defense is playing, what our goal is. We need to get this run across. Whether I make it to first base or not, I've got to get one to the right side of the field. And that's where that's why pros are pros. Oh, what's that? Oh my, how's that quote go? And I am
the walrus.
No. I meant to look it up. Don't start barking now. It was something to the effect of amateurs do it until they get it right, and pros do it until they can't get it wrong.
Okay, that's ringing some bells.
I need to go look that up because it's a really, really good quote, and it's one that I need to have in my quill of things that I throw out to people because it's true.
Yeah.
Right? The amateur is going to do it, or the good player, if you want to use a sports analogy, is going to do it till they get it right.
Yeah.
And the professional is going to do it until they can't get it wrong. Till their body they've created such muscle memory in their craft that they can't do it wrong. They might be defeated other ways, but it won't be because their body doesn't know how to do it.
Yeah. It's like when you're in basketball, if you're watching the other team shoot free throws and warm-ups, if you see the guy with the wacky wind-up, don't foul him because he's been practicing that wacky wind-up more than anybody
True.
else.
You know what? That's really true. I had never really thought about it. If he's got time to swish it around his back, he's that confident in what he's getting ready to do.
Well, and even if he's got a little hitch, if he's got, does he do 2 dribbles and a spin or something like that? Yeah. Like, you can repetition.
He is so bored with the actual shooting that he's had to make practice more interesting by working on his ball spin.
Yeah.
Or is around who is it one of the Creighton guys who goes around his back, dribbles it again, and then just.
It could have been George Gervin for all I know right now. My college basketball following this year was not great.
Well, mine wasn't either, but now we're all on college basketball overload.
Yeah.
Right? Princeton won. That's all I remember. Princeton won. So, did you have time to prepare a thought experiment for this?
Thought experiment, I guess it kind of runs in line with the terms of craftsmanship, and I'll give you a big wind up and lead in with the overarching theme is, do you do anything, or do you have, when you're picking out a photo that you think tells the story of the game, is there any particular aspect of a photo or aspects of an event or any aspect of the shot itself that gives the perceived feeling one way or another? I'll kind of wind that up with and let you think about it while I kind of introduce it in my own kind of way. Any book fans out there, Blood Meridian, it's in, I want to say within the first 50 pages of Blood Meridian. It's when the kid had already met up with the judge, and they're climbing the hill, and they're this huge mesa that they're trying to climb and everything like that. And it's run on sentence after run on sentence after run on sentence. And it's basically the duration of an entire page where it's just one block paragraph. And by the end of it, physically, like you're like, when is this going to end? And your eyes are getting tired because when you see a period, your initial reaction is to stop. But you don't see a period and you just keep going. And by that time, physically, like as you're reading it, you're getting tired while the book is moving along and they're trying to climb up the mesa. And then they get to the end in the period, they're at the top, they look, and then it's the tribe that they've been going after right there. And then the very next sentence, or the very next paragraph is just like 5 words. And then the action starts. It gives you that pause and then, okay. And then everything starts in.
Okay, I get it. I know how I'm going to answer this question, because what I heard was a writer intentionally breaking the rules of grammar to create a feeling of anxiety in the reader.
Yeah.
Right? I have this discussion with other photographers, especially sports photographers seem to be Nazis about it all the time. And that's the concept of horizon lines.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Whether the photo is crooked or tilted or things like that. And I will sometimes either intentionally shoot it or intentionally crook one, or if it's a little bit crooked and I go, I kind of like that, I might go a little bit further. The argument a lot of other photographers will make is that it makes the viewer uneasy. Mm-hmm. And I come back with, exactly. Yeah. How do you think that athlete feels? Right? If you've ever played, then you know how anxiety-filled and fast, and it can be overwhelming with all the sensory input, and it's an uneasy feeling, especially if it was a game of uneasy feelings. Yeah. So I don't mind intentionally breaking that rule of the horizon, of a crooked horizon line or a crooked angle or something that intentionally makes the viewer of the image uncomfortable. Yeah. If it makes you uncomfortable and it's still a good image, I consider that a win, because now you know a little, maybe just a little fraction of what it was like for those athletes. Sometimes you'll see me do blurred action stuff that just is just kind of chaotic, and while it can be, if it's executed right and it does, and fortune shines on the 10th of a second you had the shutter open, it can be rather artsy and painterly like, but it can also be very chaotic and unsettling to look at. And I like that because, it's all about, high level athletics is all about managing that unease and executing anyways. And so I do those things with intention, just like the writer you were describing that broke all the grammar rules to create anxiety in the reader. So yeah, I intentionally do things like that from time to time too.
And you could do that different, like before. I mean, I've done that before. I've done the just listing, just short sentences, boom, boom, to form like a long paragraph where like you hit the end and then you got to start again and again and again and again, and you're like, when is this ever going to end, kind of thing. Like right. That's another way to like build that suspense or build like that overwhelming feeling of like, holy cow, kind of thing whenever you need it. Like I think it might have been the Wisconsin game or something last year where like, they just kept handing the ball off and Nebraska couldn't stop it. And all you've got to do is just say, ran this way. You ran for 3 yards, 8 yards, 4 yards, 3 yards.
See it all play out. And then on the screen or on a page.
Yeah. And then you see that and it's like, holy cow, like when's this going to stop? And then eventually, it stops with them in the end zone. Just little things like that you can do to like, again, it doesn't, substance wise, like you're not doing anything special. You're just listing out the plays of what happened. But in the totality of the story and as like you perceive it, reading it,
right,
it's like it achieves everything that you want to achieve.
And just to wrap this back up real quick, or circle it back around before we wrap it up, and the other thing I said in a conversation with some people was craftsmanship is knowing when and how to break the rules.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can't break the rules unless you know the rules and really understand them. Then you can break them with intention to do things. So did you have anything else you wanted to add? Otherwise, we can go ahead and wrap this one up because I thought we covered a lot of stuff today.
Yeah, I think that's it. One thing I will remind people, if they are still listening, is it takes time. Doing some reporting and like talking with some professors on like we're doing kind of marketing stuff, or I'm doing some background reporting for stories that involve marketing. And one of the things that you're finding out now with people who are so involved with social media and things, it's like they don't understand the work that it takes, like the backroom work, the prep work, everything that goes into it. They just think, well, I recorded this video, I'm going to upload it, boom, bing, bang, boom, like I'm an influencer now. They don't see the various stages of influence, and by a byproduct, some of that like grammar and editing and things go right out the window, because when you're wanting content out there, it's as fast as possible, type it up and you send it out. Quality control matters.
Quality control is huge, especially in this what have you done for me in the last 30 seconds day and age.
Exactly.
So, all right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up for this episode. I'm Eric. This is Brady.
Yeah.
You can say it. Say your name.
I'm Brady.
And Brady's here. This was the eye test. And don't forget to like and subscribe so that you know when the next one comes out. And we'll see you next time.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.